What if the most dangerous thing in the universe wasn't a weapon, but a question left unasked? What if the key to galactic dominance, the secret to taming the untamable, wasn't found in the heart of a star forge or the code of a war machine, but in a simple, overlooked spark of human nature? For generations, the great empires of the galaxy looked out into the abyss, into the churning chaos at the edge of the known, and saw only monsters. They saw teeth and claws and mindless destruction. They built fleets, forged planet killers, and designed algorithms of annihilation to combat the terror of the void. And for generations, they failed. Have you ever felt that in your own life? That profound, frustrating disconnect where your effort doesn't equal your results? You push, you strive, you follow the rules, you apply all the force you can muster, but the obstacle in your path only seems to grow larger, more defiant. The great galactic powers felt this on a cosmic scale. They were masters of physics, lords of energy and matter, and yet they were children flinging stones at a hurricane, their power rendered meaningless by a force they refused to understand. They saw a beast, and so they fought it like a beast. It was their first and most fatal assumption. This is the story of how that assumption was shattered. It's the story of how a species considered young, soft, and hopelessly sentimental by the titans of the galaxy managed to do what legions of warships and armadas of drones could not. It's a story that will show you that the most potent force for change in the universe is not the ability to command, but the willingness to be curious. We are going to explore how humanity, the galactic underdog, faced down the nightmares at the edge of space and didn't flinch. They didn't draw a sword. They asked a question, and the answer they received would not only save them, but would forever alter the balance of power among the stars, proving that our greatest strength was never in our fists, but in our minds and in our hearts. The first hint that the galaxy had fundamentally misunderstood the nature of reality came not from a grand pronouncement or a stunning military victory, but from a quiet observation on a forgotten listening post. Humanity was new to the interstellar stage, a species that had practically tripped and stumbled its way into the galactic consortium, a sprawling, ancient body of species who had long ago codified the rules of existence. To the Krell hegemony, a race of granite-skinned warriors who revered strength above all else, humans were laughably fragile. To the Cygnian ascendancy, beings of pure logic and networked consciousness, humans were chaotic, emotional, and inefficient. We were a curiosity, a footnote in the grand galactic codex, and so we were given the jobs no one else wanted. We were sent to the frontiers, the boring backwaters, the quiet edges of the map where little of importance was ever expected to happen. This is where Dr. Aris Thorne found herself, stationed on Observatory Epsilon, a lonely speck of metal and plasteel orbiting a dormant brown dwarf, its sensors pointed towards a region of space known as the Umbral Maw. The Maw was a cosmic wound, a place where spacetime was thin and the laws of physics seemed to develop a nervous stutter. It was a graveyard of ships, a no-go zone on every star chart, and it was the hunting ground of the Cathar. The Cathar were the galaxy's boogeymen. Calling them beasts felt insufficient. They were more like living disasters, crystalline, semi-sentient behemoths that navigated the chaotic gravity wells near black holes and neutron stars. They didn't have ships, their bodies were vessels, shimmering with captured starlight and crackling with immense energy. When they emerged from the maw, they were like plagues of locusts made of diamond and lightning. They didn't conquer, they didn't communicate, they simply consumed. They would descend upon asteroids, moons, even small planets, and break them down, absorbing their energy and materials before vanishing back into the darkness. The Krell had been fighting a losing war against them for centuries. They would meet a Cathar incursion with overwhelming force. A fleet of their finest dreadnoughts would warp in, unleashing torrents of plasma and antimatter, and this is where the equation of power broke down. The Cathar would weather the storm, their crystalline hides glowing brighter, their energy signatures spiking. The weapons of the mighty Krell seemed to feed them, to make them stronger, more erratic, more violent. The Krell would retreat, their pride wounded, their losses staggering, leaving behind a more powerful Cathar than the one they had first engaged. Their effort was not just failing to produce results, it was producing the opposite of their intended result. From her lonely post, Aris Thorne watched the data streams from these encounters. She had access to the Krell battle logs, the sensor readings from the Cygnian probes, a galaxy's worth of information on the Cathar. But she wasn't a soldier. She was a xenolinguist and a biologist. While the Krell strategists analyzed weapon yields and shield frequencies, Aris was looking at something else entirely. The Cathar emitted light. A dazzling, hypnotic, ever-shifting display of bioluminescence that the rest of the galaxy dismissed as a biological byproduct, like the shimmer on a beetle's wing, pretty but meaningless. A side effect of their terrifying metabolism. Aris didn't think so. She had spent years studying the non-verbal communication of Earth's own deep-sea creatures, the subtle grammar of the squid's chromatophores, the complex poetry of a whale's song. She saw the flashes of light from the Cathar and felt a flicker of recognition. It wasn't random. There was a rhythm, a cadence. There were repeating motifs, phrases of light that appeared in specific contexts. When a Cathar was under attack, the patterns became frantic, sharp, and chaotic. When it was drifting peacefully in the void, the light was slow, melodic, almost serene. This was her first win, a private victory in the silent theater of her own mind. The galaxy saw a monster's rage. Aris Thorne saw a creature screaming in a language no one else was bothering to learn. She began to catalog the light patterns, treating them not as energy readings, but as phonemes, as the building blocks of a visual language. It was a painstaking, thankless task. Her reports to the consortium were filed away unread. Her human superiors advised her to focus on more practical matters, like plotting the Cathar's destructive trajectories. They were telling her to watch where the monster was going, not to wonder why it was going there. But human curiosity is a stubborn, defiant thing. It is the spark that drove our ancestors from their caves to stare at the moon, the same spark that drove Aris to spend her sleepless nights staring into the heart of the galaxy's greatest terror, armed not with a cannon, but with a hypothesis. The galaxy thought the Cathar were a problem of force. Aris was beginning to believe they were a problem of translation. And in that quiet, revolutionary thought, the fate of empires had already begun to turn, though no one, least of all Aris Thorne herself, could yet comprehend the magnitude of what she had just unlocked. The most powerful weapon in the universe wasn't a weapon at all. It was the simple, audacious act of trying to understand. To deepen this value, to move from a private epiphany to a galactic revolution, Aris knew she needed more than just a theory. She needed proof. The data she had collected was compelling to her, but to the hardened pragmatists of the Krell hegemony or the cold logicians of the Cygnian ascendancy, it was just noise, a pattern-seeking ape seeing faces in the clouds. The consortium was built on millennia of established science and military doctrine. The idea that a junior researcher from a backwater species could have deciphered the mood lighting of a galactic menace was, to put it mildly, absurd. Her first formal proposal was met with a wall of silence, which was somehow more insulting than outright rejection. She had suggested a passive experiment, a series of unmanned probes equipped not with weapons but with high-frequency light emitters to be sent into the umbral maw. These probes would not attack, they would speak. They would broadcast simple, universal concepts in the language of light she was beginning to piece together. Prime numbers, the atomic structure of hydrogen. A visual representation of pi. The very things humanity had once broadcast into its own empty night sky, hoping for a response. The response from her superiors was polite but firm. Resources were too valuable to be wasted on such a fanciful project. The Krell, who held significant sway over frontier security, vetoed the idea immediately. Their representative, a towering, decorated officer named Commander Vorlag, sent her a one-line message that was relayed through official channels. "We do not talk to vermin, we exterminate them." This was the mindset she was up against, a philosophy carved into the bedrock of galactic society. That which is not like us, that which is powerful and incomprehensible, must be a threat. It was a fear-based logic, an evolutionary dead end that had been elevated to the level of interstellar policy. Vorlag and the Krell were trapped in a cycle of their own making. Their aggression provoked a violent response from the Cathar, which in turn justified their aggression. It was a perfect, self-sustaining loop of violence. Aris felt the familiar sting of being underestimated, a feeling common to many humans in the consortium. But frustration quickly gave way to a quiet determination. If they wouldn't give her the tools, she would have to build her own. She began to work in secret, repurposing the equipment on her own observatory. The station's primary communication laser, meant for sending data packets back to the core worlds, was powerful. With some clever modifications to the focusing array and a lot of jury-rigged code, she could modulate its beam, turning it into a giant, albeit clumsy, flashlight. It was risky. Unauthorized use of station equipment was grounds for immediate dismissal and repatriation. But the thought of Vorlag's dismissive message, the image of those magnificent, misunderstood creatures being brutalized, fueled her. This wasn't just about scientific discovery anymore. It was about standing up to a galactic bully, about proving that a different way was possible. She chose her target carefully. A lone Cathar, smaller than the giants the Krell usually engaged, had been lingering near a dust cloud several light minutes from her station. Its light patterns were slow, rhythmic, what she had catalogued as a resting or contented state. Taking a deep breath, she bypassed the station's automated safeties and aimed the laser. She didn't broadcast anything complex. She started with the simplest thing she could think of, a pulse. On, off. A single beat, a cosmic heartbeat sent out into the darkness. She waited for an hour, nothing happened. The Cathar continued its lazy, silent dance. Doubt began to creep in. Had she imagined it all? Was she just another human seeing ghosts in the data? Then it happened. A single, brilliant flash emanated from the creature, perfectly mimicking her own. On, off. Eris's own heart felt like it had stopped. It wasn't a coincidence. The timing was too precise. The response was too clear. It had heard her, or rather it had seen her. Over the next several weeks, she continued her secret dialogue. She sent 2 pulses. The Cathar replied with 2. She sent a sequence, 1 pulse, then 2, then 3. The creature replied in kind. It was a conversation at the most primal level, the establishment of a shared hello. She began to feel a strange kinship with the distant creature. She gave it a name. Echo. She would spend her shifts talking to it in patterns of light, her console reflecting the silent, luminous conversation. She was building authority, not with the consortium, but with the very creature the consortium feared. She was demonstrating in the most direct way possible that communication was possible. Her confidence growing, she tried something more ambitious. She broadcast the frequency of light absorbed by hydrogen, the most common element in the universe. A universal constant, a piece of objective truth. Echo's response was breathtaking. It didn't just mimic her. Its entire crystalline body began to shimmer, and from its core it projected a complex, 3-dimensional latticework of light. It was a stunningly beautiful, intricate geometric form. It took Eris and the station's computer a full day to analyze it. The result left her speechless. It was a model of a carbon atom. It hadn't just understood her message. It had replied with a more complex one. It had demonstrated a knowledge of chemistry. This wasn't a beast. It wasn't just a semi-sentient creature. This was an intelligence, alien and vast, but an intelligence nonetheless. It was a life form that thought in principles of physics and mathematics, that communicated through the pure language of the cosmos. Eris knew with a certainty that resonated in her very DNA that this changed everything. The Cathar were not monsters to be slain. They were perhaps the most profound discovery in galactic history, and she was the only one who knew it. The weight of that knowledge was immense. Her secret project was no longer a mere scientific inquiry. It was a political bombshell, a truth that could either save the galaxy or get her killed. The Krell hegemony had built its empire on the myth of its strength, a strength proven in its endless war against the Cathar. To suggest the Cathar were intelligent wasn't just a scientific reclassification. It was a direct challenge to the Krell's cultural identity, to their very reason for being. She compiled her new data, the recordings of her light-based conversations, the analysis of the carbon atom model, into a new report. This time, she didn't send it through the normal, ignorable channels. She encrypted it and sent it directly to a handful of individuals she hoped might be receptive. A senior Cygnian analyst known for his intellectual curiosity, and a human admiral who had once quietly expressed skepticism about the Krell's tactics. As she hit send, she looked back at her monitor. Out in the black, Echo was still there, shimmering softly. It was waiting. It was listening. And Eris realized she had just lit a fuse. The question was no longer whether the galaxy would listen to her, but what would happen when the explosion finally came. The comfortable lies that had governed the stars for eons were about to be confronted by a very inconvenient and luminous truth. The response to Aris's encrypted report was a cascade of consequences she could have never fully predicted. The human admiral, a man named Kenji Tanaka, responded within hours. His message was brief and cryptic. Data received. Maintain your position. Do not engage further. Await instructions. You are not alone. The words were a lifeline, a confirmation that someone in a position of power saw what she saw. The Cygnian analyst, designated as Unit 734, took longer. The Cygnian ascendancy processed information with glacial, meticulous logic. Their reply, when it came, was not words of encouragement, but a barrage of questions, a request for raw sensor logs, algorithmic models, and a detailed breakdown of her translation matrix. They were skeptical, but they were intrigued. They were testing her data, trying to find the flaw in her logic. For a Cygnian, this was the highest form of engagement. But a secret of this magnitude cannot be contained for long in a networked galaxy. Her message, intended for a select few, had triggered flags in the consortium's automated security protocols. And somewhere in that chain of command, someone alerted the Krell hegemony. Commander Vorlag did not send a message this time. He sent a warship. The arrival of the Krell destroyer, the Fist of Katash*, was an act of brutalist intimidation. The ship warped into orbit around Observatory Epsilon without so much as a formal hail. It was a flying fortress of gunmetal gray armor, bristling with weapon emplacements, casting a predatory shadow over Aris's tiny station. Vorlag's face appeared on her main screen, uninvited. He was the physical embodiment of his species. Broad, craggy features that looked like they were hewn from rock, eyes like burning coals set deep within his skull. "Dr. Thorne," he began, his voice a low growl that vibrated through the station's speakers. "You have been conducting unauthorized and dangerous experiments on the frontier. You have been communicating with a galactic contagion. You are a traitor to the safety and security of the consortium." Aris felt a tremor of fear, but she held her ground. "Commander, I have been communicating with an intelligent species. The Cathar are not what you think they are. Your aggression is the only thing making them dangerous." Vorlag let out a short, harsh laugh. "Intelligent? I have seen what your intelligent species does to colonies, to fleets, to entire worlds. It is a cancer, Doctor, and you are attempting to reason with a tumor. Your sentimentality is a uniquely human weakness, and it has now become a threat. You will cease your transmissions immediately. You will transfer all of your research data to my vessel, and you will prepare to be taken into Krell custody for interrogation." The threat was clear. He wasn't there to debate, he was there to silence her. But as he spoke, Aris saw something flicker on her sensor display. It was Echo. The Cathar had moved closer, drawn by the arrival of the massive Krell ship. Its light patterns had changed, becoming sharp, agitated, echoing the distress she was feeling. And in that moment, Aris understood something profound. The Cathar weren't just intelligent, they were empathetic. At least this one was. It could sense the threat. It could feel her fear. "Commander," she said, her voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through her veins. "If you power down your weapons and stand down, I can prove it to you. I can show you that communication is possible." "I have no interest in your proof," Vorlag snarled. "I have my orders, and my orders are to contain this threat. That includes you." The communication cut out. A moment later, the Fist of Katash powered its main weapon systems. Energy levels on the destroyer spiked, its forward lance cannon beginning to glow with terrifying intensity. But its target wasn't Aris's station. It was Echo. Vorlag was going to execute the creature right in front of her to prove his point in the only way he knew how, with overwhelming, final force. A cold fury replaced Aris's fear. This wasn't about science anymore. It was about protecting a life, a mind that she had been the first to discover. Acting on pure instinct, she did the one thing Vorlag would never expect. She flew her tiny station directly into his line of fire. Observatory Epsilon was not a ship. It was a glorified tin can with sensors. It had no shields, no weapons, no armor to speak of. To place it between a Krell warship and its target was suicide. Alarms blared across her console. An automated voice warned of imminent impact. Vorlag's enraged face appeared back on her screen. "What is the meaning of this, human? Move your station now." "No," Aris said, her hands flying across her control panel, not to steer away, but to broadcast. She opened a wideband transmission, sending a single desperate message in the language of light, not to Echo, but to the Krell ship. She didn't send a threat. She sent the geometric model of the carbon atom, the proof, the undeniable evidence of intelligence. She flooded the Krell ship's sensors with it, a last, defiant act of truth against power. And behind her in the void, Echo did something extraordinary. As the Krell weapon reached peak charge, the Cathar didn't flee. It didn't power up its own defenses. It moved towards her, its massive crystalline form acting as a shield for her fragile station. The light it emitted was no longer agitated. It was a steady, brilliant, unwavering glow, a pattern she had never seen before, a pattern of protection. A predator was shielding its human friend. For a heart-stopping second, the universe seemed to hold its breath. The Krell commander stared at his screen, at the tiny human station and the giant, luminous creature protecting it, and at the impossible data flooding his sensors. The foolhardy bravery of the human, the inexplicable behavior of the beast, the mathematical proof of sentience shining in his face. Every instinct, every doctrine, every fiber of his being screamed at him to fire, to erase the anomaly, to restore order through destruction. But for the first time in his long, decorated career, Commander Vorlag hesitated. The fatal assumption that had guided his entire life was cracking under the weight of this impossible scene. His effort to prove his worldview right was being met with an undeniable result that proved it catastrophically wrong. The human hadn't used a weapon. She had used an idea, and it was proving to be more powerful than his entire warship. The silence stretched, thick and heavy. The glow from the Krell lance cannon slowly began to fade. Vorlag had not stood down, but he had not fired. On the bridge of the asterisk fist of Kadash asterisk, a warrior's certainty had just been shattered by a scientist's curiosity. The battle for the Umbral Maw was not over, but its nature had fundamentally, irrevocably changed. It was no longer a war of extermination. It was now a battle for the soul of the galaxy. So here we are, at a moment of cosmic stalemate. The pinnacle of galactic technology, the might of a warrior empire, all held in check by the sheer, stubborn audacity of a single human and the loyalty of a creature no one believed could feel anything at all. The entire Krell philosophy, a belief system built on the simple binary of predator and prey, was being brought to its knees. All because for centuries they had been asking the wrong question. They asked, how do we destroy it? When they should have been asking, what is it trying to tell us? They saw a monster, so a monster is what they got. This is the power of a fatal assumption. It creates the very reality it predicts. Their violence was a self-fulfilling prophecy. But Eris Thorn, an outcast from a species of outcasts, had asked a different question. She had chosen curiosity over fear, communication over conflict. And the answer she was about to receive, the chain of events she had just set in motion, would not just save a single creature or a lonely space station. It would shatter the very foundations of power in the galaxy, forcing ancient empires to look at the universe, and themselves, in an entirely new light. Think about a problem in your own life that feels completely unsolvable, a wall you keep running into. Are you trying to blast through it with the same force, the same approach, time and time again, expecting a different result? Or have you ever stopped, truly stopped, to listen to what that problem is trying to teach you? Have you ever considered that the obstacle isn't just an obstacle, but a message in a language you haven't yet learned to speak? The standoff in the void outside Observatory Epsilon did not end with a bang, but with a tense, vibrating silence. On the bridge of the asterisk fist of Kadash asterisk, Commander Vorlag was experiencing a sensation entirely foreign to him and his species: cognitive dissonance. His tactical display showed a clear target. His military doctrine demanded its annihilation. His cultural imperative was to cleanse the taint of the Cathar from the stars. Yet the data scrolling across his secondary screen, the complex geometric patterns broadcast by the human, told a different story. It was elegant. It was undeniably intelligent. It was a truth that his weapons could not unmake. To fire now would not be an act of war. It would be an act of murder. And to complicate matters further, Admiral Tanaka's authority suddenly made itself felt. A Priority 1 communique, flagged with the highest security clearance of the human interstellar mandate, flashed onto Vorlag's command console. It wasn't a request. It was a declaration. Observatory Epsilon and Dr. Eris Thorn were now under the direct protection of the human mandate. Any hostile action against them would be considered an act of war against humanity. It was an audacious, almost suicidal bluff. Humanity's fleet was a fraction of the size of the Krell hegemonies, but it was a bluff made with the knowledge that the Cygnian ascendancy was watching. Unit 734, the analyst Eris had contacted, had finished its assessment. The Cygnians, in their cold, logical way, had concluded that Eris's data had a 98.7% probability of being accurate. The Cathar were a sentient species. The Krell had, for centuries, been committing unwitting xenocide. The political calculus of the galaxy had just been flipped on its head. Vorlag, caught between a direct order from his own high command and the dawning political firestorm, made a choice that saved his career and likely his life. He did nothing. He held his position, his ship a silent, menacing sentinel, as the situation escalated from a frontier incident to a full-blown consortium crisis. News of the Thorn revelation spread like wildfire. On every core world, in every data lounge and political chamber, the implications were being debated. The Krell were forced into a humiliating defensive posture, their entire military history reframed as a tragic, brutal misunderstanding. Species that had long chafed under Krell dominance saw an opportunity. The balance of power, held static for 1,000 years, was now in flux. And at the center of it all was Eris Thorn, no longer a forgotten researcher but the most famous human in the galaxy. She was recalled from her observatory, not in disgrace, but as a hero. Admiral Tanaka met her personally. He was an older man, his face a roadmap of quiet burdens, but his eyes held a fire that Eris recognized. It was the same spark of curiosity, tempered by decades of political maneuvering. "Dr. Thorn," he said, foregoing a formal salute for a simple, respectful nod. "You've handed humanity a gift and a terrible weapon." "Sir, I don't understand," Eris replied, still overwhelmed by the whirlwind of events. "You've given us truth," Tanaka explained, his voice low. "And in the hands of politicians, truth can be shaped into a spear. There are factions within the Mandate who want to use your discovery to leverage power, to demand concessions from the Krell, to elevate humanity's status in the consortium through diplomatic blackmail. They want to turn your act of communication into an act of aggression." The irony was crushing. In her attempt to stop a war, she had inadvertently handed her own people the casus belli for a new one, a colder, more political conflict. She saw her beautiful discovery, her moment of pure connection with Echo, being twisted into a bargaining chip. "That can't happen," Eris insisted. "The point wasn't to shame the Krell, it was to understand the Cathar, it was to start a dialogue." "I agree," Tanaka said. "Which is why I'm putting you in charge. We are forming a new initiative, the Cephalopod Project, a joint scientific and diplomatic mission. Your new assignment, Doctor, is to go back to the Umbral Maw, not to a listening post, but on a purpose-built vessel, the HSV Curiosity. Your mission is to do what no one has ever done before, establish formal, peaceful contact with the Cathar civilization." It was an unprecedented move. The consortium was in an uproar. The Krell protested vehemently, claiming it was too dangerous. The Cygnians offered their analytical support but remained physically aloof. Many of the smaller species watched with a mixture of hope and fear. Humanity, the newcomers, the sentimental apes, were taking the lead on the single most important issue in the galaxy. The HSV Curiosity was unlike any ship ever built. It had no weapons of any kind. Its hull was a complex array of light emitters, capable of generating incredibly complex three-dimensional patterns. Its crew was not made up of soldiers, but of linguists, mathematicians, biologists, and artists. It was a ship designed not to fight, but to listen, to learn, and to speak. As Eris prepared for the mission, she was plagued by a new kind of doubt. The pressure was immense. The fate of galactic peace, the reputation of her entire species, rested on her shoulders. One wrong move, one misinterpreted signal could lead to disaster. Could she really bridge the gap between two such radically different forms of life? The communication with Echo had been simple, a conversation between two individuals. Now she had to be an ambassador to an entire civilization. Her greatest challenge came from an unexpected source, Commander Vorlag. In a shocking political maneuver, the Krell hegemony assigned him as their official liaison to the Cephalopod Project. He was to accompany Eris on the Curiosity. It was a punishment for his hesitation, a way for his superiors to humiliate him. But it was also a test. The Krell wanted an inside observer, someone to report back on humanity's methods. The first meeting between Aris and Vorlag aboard the Asterisk Curiosity was fraught with tension. He stood in the center of the ship's bridge, a space designed to be open and collaborative, more like a university lecture hall than a command center, and he looked utterly out of place, a monolith of war in a temple of science. "Doctor," he said, his voice flat, devoid of its earlier aggression. "I am here under orders. I will not interfere with your mission, but I will observe. And I will state for the record that I believe this to be a grave mistake." "Welcome aboard, Commander," Aris replied, choosing to meet his hostility with professional courtesy. "Your perspective may be valuable. You've had more direct experience with the Cathar than anyone." "My experience has been in their destruction," he retorted. "I have buried friends and salvaged fleets broken by them. Do not mistake my presence for approval." The journey back to the Umbral Maw was a long one, filled with meticulous preparation. Aris and her team refined their light-based language, developing a more complex grammar and syntax. They theorized about Cathar society. Were they a hive mind, a collection of individuals? What did they value? What were their motivations? Vorlag watched it all with a stoic silence. He sat in on briefings, his arms crossed, his face an unreadable mask of stone. But Aris noticed small things. He paid close attention during the xenobiology presentations. He spent hours in the ship's archives, reviewing his own battle logs, but this time cross-referencing them with Aris's data on Cathar light patterns. He was a warrior re-examining the face of his enemy, and for the first time seeing not a monster but a mystery. One evening, Aris found him alone on the observation deck, staring out at the swirling nebula that marked the edge of the maw. "They look different from out here," Vorlag said without turning, his voice quieter than she had ever heard it. "In battle, all you see is chaos and energy, but out here, there's a pattern, a grace." "That's what I saw," Aris said softly, standing beside him. "It's all about perspective, Commander. What you look for determines what you find." He turned to face her, his gaze intense. "You believe they have a culture, a civilization." "I believe they have a consciousness," Aris replied. "And any consciousness, given enough time, builds a culture. It might not be a culture of cities and laws, but of mathematics and starlight, a culture of the void." Vorlag fell silent again, but something had shifted between them. The rigid certainty of the soldier was beginning to soften, eroded by the persistent curiosity of the scientist. He was starting to ask the right questions. When the Asterisk Curiosity finally reached its destination, the heart of the Umbral Maw, it was not met by a single Cathar. It was met by thousands. A vast, silent armada of crystalline beings hung in the void, their collective light creating a shimmering aurora that dwarfed the ship. They were larger and more complex than Echo had been, their forms intricate and ancient. They had been waiting for them. The moment of truth had arrived. The bridge of the Asterisk Curiosity was silent, every eye on Aris. She took a deep breath, stepped up to the broadcast console, and sent the first official message from humanity to the Cathar civilization. It wasn't a greeting of a diplomat or the query of a scientist. It was the simple, universal message she had shared with Vorlag on the observation deck. It was a message of shared perspective. She broadcast a complex sequence of light that simply said, "We see you." The response was instantaneous and overwhelming. The 1,000 Cathar flashed in perfect unison, bathing the human ship in a wave of gentle, warm light. Then from the center of their formation, they began to broadcast back. It wasn't a simple mimicry. It was a story. A saga told in light and geometry, of a species born in the gravity wells of dying stars, of a consciousness that perceived the universe not as matter and energy, but as a symphony of frequencies and resonances. They showed the humans their history. They had watched the younger, matter-based life forms of the galaxy evolve. They had seen empires rise and fall. They had perceived the Krell's attacks not as malice, but as a painful, chaotic noise, a discordant shriek in the cosmic symphony. They had responded with their own chaotic energy, a desperate attempt to silence the pain. And they showed Aris why they had come. A new sound was echoing through the void, a dissonance far greater and more terrifying than the Krell fleets. It was a threat that consumed not just planets but the very fabric of spacetime, a creeping rot from beyond the galactic rim, a silence that was spreading and extinguishing the stars. The Cathar had not been on a path of destruction. They had been on a path of migration, fleeing from a darkness the Consortium's sensors couldn't even detect. On the bridge of the Curiosity a human scientist and a Krell warrior stood side by side, watching the revelation unfold. They had come to the edge of the void seeking to understand a galactic beast, only to discover that the beast was a refugee, and that the true monster was still out there in the dark waiting. The fatal assumption had been peeled back to reveal a far more terrifying truth. The Cathar were not the galaxy's greatest threat. They were its first and perhaps only warning. The game had changed once again, and humanity, the curious newcomer, was now standing at the very forefront of a war for existence itself. A war that could not be won with weapons, but only with the one thing they had in abundance: a willingness to understand the unknown. The Cathar's revelation sent a shockwave through the Consortium, a jolt of existential terror that dwarfed the previous political squabbles. The data, the story told in light, was broadcast from the Curiosity to every major power. The Cygnians confirmed it first. Their deep space sensors, once calibrated to look for the specific resonance patterns the Cathar provided, detected it. A creeping, expanding zone of null spacetime at the galaxy's edge. It wasn't just empty space. It was a place where the fundamental constants of the universe were decaying. Stars that entered it didn't explode. They simply went out. It was a slow, silent entropy, a cosmic cancer that was consuming reality itself. The Krell's centuries of fighting the Cathar had been like a man punching the fire alarm while ignoring the blaze. This new threat, this void blight, as the human scientists began to call it, had a unifying effect born of sheer terror. Old rivalries seemed petty in the face of annihilation. The Krell hegemony, humbled and reeling from their colossal error in judgment, were the first to pledge their full military support to a new, unified command. But they knew their weapons were useless against such a foe. They turned for the first time in their history not to their generals, but to their erstwhile enemies. They turned to humanity. An emergency summit of the Galactic Consortium was called, and it was held not on one of the grand core worlds, but virtually, linked to the bridge of the HSV Curiosity Eris Thorne, no longer just a doctor but now an ambassador, found herself at the center of the galactic stage. Alongside her stood Admiral Tanaka, and in a move that stunned the Krell High Command, Commander Vorlag, who had personally requested to remain with the Cephalopod project as a permanent military advisor. His journey from antagonist to ally was a powerful symbol of the new era. "We have spent generations believing strength was measured in kilotons and shield capacities," Vorlag stated to the assembled leaders, his voice resonating with the weight of newfound humility. "We were wrong. The Cathar have shown us that true strength lies in perception, in understanding. We do not know how to fight this blight, but Dr. Thorne and her people have shown us how to listen. Humanity will lead us, the Krell will follow." This declaration sent ripples of astonishment across the Consortium. The proudest, most militaristic empire in the galaxy was ceding leadership to the youngest, softest species. It was a revolution. The Cephalopod project was expanded, transformed into the Aegis Initiative, a multi-species collaboration with a singular goal: to understand and halt the void blight. The Curiosity became the flagship of a new kind of fleet, a fleet of science vessels, exploratory craft, and Cathar guides. Eris's role shifted again. She was no longer just a linguist. She was a strategist, a diplomat, and the primary link between the organic life of the Consortium and the crystalline consciousness of the Cathar. She spent her days in a state of constant communication, a trilateral dialogue between human ingenuity, Krell pragmatism, and Cathar cosmic awareness. The Cathar, now understood as allies, explained their nature more fully. They were, in a sense, the immune system of the galaxy. Their existence was tied to the health of spacetime itself. They were drawn to areas of high energy and gravitational stress, black holes, neutron stars, because these were the places where the fabric of reality was strongest, most vibrant. The void blight was the ultimate pathogen, a force that deadened the very reality they were a part of. Their consumption of moons and asteroids wasn't feeding. It was a desperate attempt to gather materials to create more of their kind, to bolster their numbers against the encroaching silence. Under Cathar guidance, the Aegis Initiative began to probe the edges of the Blight. They discovered it was not a natural phenomenon. At the heart of the null space, undetectable by conventional sensors but visible to the Cathar, was a structure. A colossal, artificial construct of impossible geometry, broadcasting a frequency of pure anti-entropy, a signal that actively unraveled the laws of physics around it. It was a weapon, a doomsday device of unimaginable scale, left over from a conflict so ancient that it predated every known civilization in the galaxy. The Cathar had no memory of its creators, only that they had waged a war that had torn the universe asunder, and this device was the final, spiteful act of a long-dead race. It had been dormant for billions of years, but something had recently reactivated it, causing its slow, inexorable expansion. The situation seemed hopeless. How could they fight a weapon that destroyed physics itself? The Krell warships were useless. Cygnian logic gates failed near the Blight's edge. But humanity, as always, brought a different tool to the table, not just curiosity, but ingenuity born of desperation. The spark within. Eris and her team of scientists, working alongside Krell engineers and Cygnian analysts, began to work on a theory. If the Blight was a signal, a broadcast of anti-reality, then perhaps it could be jammed. Or more radically, perhaps it could be countered with a signal of its own, a broadcast of pro-reality, a concentrated beam of existence. The concept was pure science fiction, even for the advanced races of the consortium. But the Cathar provided the key. Their bodies were natural resonators for the frequencies of spacetime. They could, in theory, act as amplifiers. If a powerful enough, life-affirming signal could be generated, the Cathar could focus it, magnify it, and project it into the heart of the Blight. The problem was generating that signal. What frequency represented reality? What was the carrier wave for existence? The Cygnians tried to calculate it and failed, their models collapsing into paradox. The Krell tried to brute force it, experimenting with energy signatures that only fed the Blight. Once again, it fell to Eris Thorn to find the answer, and she found it not in a complex equation, but in the most human place imaginable, her own mind. She had spent months communing with the Cathar, sharing not just data but concepts, feelings, art. She had shown them Earth's history, its triumphs and its tragedies. And she realized the one concept that was most antithetical to the silent, entropic death of the Blight was not life itself, but something more specific. It was consciousness. It was potential. It was the messy, chaotic, unpredictable spark of self-awareness that drives a species to ask, why? The plan they devised was insane. It was a testament to how far the galaxy had come, from rigid doctrine to desperate, beautiful creativity. Using the *Curiosity**S broadcast array, augmented with Cygnian technology, they would not broadcast a single frequency. They would broadcast a symphony of consciousness. They would link the minds of thousands of volunteers from across the consortium, human, Krell, Cygnian, and 24 other species, into a single massive telepathic choir. Each mind would focus on a single powerful concept: hope, love, creation, discovery, sacrifice. All the messy, illogical, emotional drivers that the Blight sought to erase. Eris herself would be the conductor, her mind the nexus through which the torrent of thought and emotion would be channeled. Commander Vorlag, in his final, complete act of transformation, volunteered to be her anchor, his disciplined Krell mind providing the structure and focus needed to prevent Eris from being overwhelmed and losing herself in the psychic storm. The fleet of the Aegis Initiative, a combined force of consortium ships and 1,000,000 shimmering Cathar, gathered at the edge of the Void Blight. The silent, star-eating darkness loomed before them, a hole in the fabric of the universe. Inside the *Curiosity*, Eris, Vorlag, and the volunteer telepaths linked their minds. What followed cannot be described in words of physics or warfare. It was an act of pure creation. Eris felt the combined consciousness of the galaxy flow through her. She felt the fierce, protective loyalty of the Krell, the cold, beautiful logic of the Cygnians, the boundless, chaotic creativity of her own species. It was a torrent of life, a defiant roar of existence against the silence. She focused it all, shaped it with Vorlag's iron will, and broadcast it through the ship's emitters. The signal, a beam of pure, weaponized hope, struck the assembled Cathar. They lit up like a billion suns, their crystalline bodies resonating with the psychic energy. They focused the beam, a lance of pure meaning, and hurled it into the heart of the blight. For a moment, nothing happened. The darkness seemed to swallow the light, to consume the very idea of hope. Then a change, a ripple at the edge of the blight. The creeping entropy slowed. The null space began to recede. The weaponized signal of consciousness was not destroying the ancient device. It was healing it. It was overriding the signal of anti-entropy with a signal of creation, reprogramming the doomsday machine with the collected will of the living. Slowly, painstakingly, the void blight began to shrink. The stars it had consumed did not reappear, their loss a permanent scar on the galaxy. But its expansion was halted, then reversed. The Cathar, their energy spent, flickered and dimmed, their great work done. On the bridge of the Curiosity Eris collapsed, caught by Vorlag. The psychic backlash was immense, but she was alive. The link was broken. A weary silence fell over the bridge, broken only by the cheers and cries of relief echoing from the comms channels across the fleet. They had done it. They had faced literal oblivion, a foe beyond comprehension, and they had won. Not with bigger guns or faster ships, but with empathy, with cooperation, with a radical, desperate curiosity. They had tamed the galactic beast at the edge of the void, only to find that the beast was a friend, and that by learning to trust it, they had learned how to save themselves. In the aftermath, the Galactic Consortium was reborn. The old hierarchies were gone, replaced by a council where humanity, the Krell, the Signians, and a representative voice for the Cathar held equal weight. The focus of galactic society shifted from expansion and conflict to exploration and understanding. The Aegis Initiative became a permanent institution, dedicated to studying the deep mysteries of the universe, not as threats to be conquered, but as wonders to be embraced. Eris Thorn became a living legend, but she shied away from the accolades. She returned to her work, to the quiet, patient task of deepening the dialogue between the galaxy's disparate minds. Her greatest contribution was not the single act of stopping the blight, but the cultural shift she had inspired. She had taught the galaxy that the unknown is not something to be feared, but something to be curious about. She had proven that empathy is not a weakness, but the most powerful force in the universe. The old empires had built their thrones on foundations of steel and fire, believing that was strength. They spent millennia staring into the abyss, and the abyss, as the old human saying went, stared back. But they learned, through the courage of a humble scientist, that true power isn't the force you can project into the darkness. It's the connection you can forge within it. It's the willingness to listen to what the darkness has to say. So the question we are left with is not whether our own curiosity will lead us to the stars. The history of our species suggests that is an inevitability. The real question is far more profound. When we finally arrive in the great, silent expanse and meet the things that dwell there, what will we choose to listen to? Will we hear only the echo of our own fears, or will we have the courage to listen for a symphony we have yet to understand?